Hi, everyone. Welcome to Type Talks. Today we have Joe Arrigo, and we're here to talk about his new book, Marbles and Sculptor. It talks about things ranging from his journey into type, his definition of the functions. He takes experts and he also helps add in their definition too. So he talks about the practical applications of using type in this book. And so, Joe, I'm wondering if you could tell us a bit about you and the book.
Yeah. The book, I never thought I was a writer. I still don't really consider myself a writer. I think it's weird to say you're an author. But I had, probably like yourself, one day you're going to write a book, guaranteed, but you're overflowing with thoughts and ideas, and you're like, well, I should just put this down somewhere. So I started to write like these very short vignettes, like 750 words about the cognitive functions. And then I said, oh, wait, this is actually turning out to be, if I combine these, now I have like 5,000 words, and like then that was the center of the book. So then I just went in each direction that way and like created the background of my story and how I got to type and how a lot of people, millennials especially, get into type. And then I went to the practical application, the very extroverted thinking part of like, well, let's try to apply it to some spaces that I have not seen it applied to before. And then I do like a resources section, which you're included in that, and I have kind of do a list of like the people I would consider as like good content creators, and if people want to explore further, they can go there. But my story that you kind of asked, like, tell me about yourself, was the hardest part of the book to write. I hate people's stories, honestly do. Like if I'm reading a nonfiction book, like a business book, I just skip their story I just go right to like, tell me about what you're talking about. So I had to have a coach like get it out, just pull it out of me. Like, tell me about like growing up and like, where's that transition that you got to type? And I guess I'll fast forward to the point where I was in a sales job and things weren't good or things weren't bad. I really say I was at this plateau, I was content, which is always negative for an INTJ because, as Love Who has said on his channel, like INTJs are builders, and I wasn't building anything. I was just in this maintenance mode, and that was negative. And I just had enough brain capacity to really dig into the 16 personalities assessment at the time and go deeper. And then I kind of explain how 2 years later, I'm writing this book, and I'm like, oh my God, every single thought of my life is through the type lens. So I think that's the concise version of who I am and what the book might be about.
Yeah, you had someone encourage you to write your story into type. And as an NI dominant type, there's this inclination to want to jump past that. And it's like, all right, we're going to get to the meat and bones and the actual concepts. And someone's like, what? Slow down. We need to hear the chronology of your story. And so, yeah, as a fellow NI dom, I can relate to that. It's like, why do you have to hear the A to Z of my life?
Yeah, and that's why I hired an ENTP copywriter, and she was great. And she would not accept any concision, any NI conciseness. She was like, nope, give an example. Nope, tell a story. Nope, get a quote from a client. And it really made the book, that's why like type is real, because if you're an INFJ, you need an ENFP to edit it for you to make sure you're not missing anything. And that made the story come alive. It made my points just a lot crisper because NI wants to just kind of gloss over all the facts and data and just say this is a thing and this is how it is, and people hate that. Certain people hate it and they want to know why. So I kind of unsolicited advice to the audience: if you're writing, have your opposite type edit, not your same type, because they'll probably just agree and they'll be like, it looks good.
It's true. You don't want a yes man. You don't want someone who agrees with what you do. If you want to improve, you got to find someone who will challenge what you write, and finding someone with the opposite functions is a way to challenge your conscious functions. So,
absolutely.
Yeah, good TENI strategy in your book making process. So something very notable about your book, Joe, is that your descriptions of the cognitive functions are actually very concise and easy to read. A lot of people, when they explain the functions, they overcomplicate it, and then newbies will have difficulty with comprehending the sheer overly complicated, vague, undefined definition of the functions. But you do a good job of making them concise, making them easy to read, but still containing the essence of the functions. And you go from quoting Jung and also dissecting Beebe's work in those as well.
Yeah. And thank you for saying that. All the books you see behind me, a lot of ones you've read, and a lot of the information we kind of all have. And I was like, you'll notice in the book I don't talk about the 4-letter code, I versus E. It's like so many people have done that. I'm not trying to rewrite the 4 letters. I'm also not trying to tell the history of Isabel Myers and Carl Jung either. So I kind of just jump into like the functions because that's the meat and potatoes of it. But Jung, we got to start there. We got to quote him. I'll give a little bit of my interpretation, and then Beebe's work on how the functions develop. I feel like you can't talk about that because type's always about development. So you can't talk about the functions unless you talk about how they will progress. And there's whether or not 8 functions exist is not the discussion, but I believe they exist. So I thought he had to be quoted in there. And yeah, that's what, like under 1,000 words, a couple pages. It doesn't need to be overcomplicated. So thank you for saying that.
You did a good job with that.
I'm sure there are people in the community that would say like, oh, that's technically not TI or that's technically not SI or it's different. But once again, my INTJ bias towards things like what SI is, I could have got it wrong, but it's tough when you have this access to that function in your real life. It's hard to say. I'm basically just talking about SI from my wife's point of view, what I think it is from an ISTJ's point of view. So I could definitely get it wrong.
Yeah, well, I think you did a good job. And so in the book, you also talk about how type is a meta frame. And so I think that that's quite a good way to put it, that it is the framework in which you can put every other smaller framework under.
Yeah, and I have to give Talking with Famous People credit there because I can't steal that. He said that in an interview, and I said, that's a really good way to describe it because there is not an interaction, there's not an experience, there is not a situation in life that you could get into that you could not apply type to. And the only caveat to that I can imagine is like mental illness or something where it doesn't fit. But even then I would try to make it work. But pretty much if you understand the superstructure at play, then everything starts to make sense. There are other models, there are other assessments, personality frameworks that apply to certain aspects, but it is not a huge superstructure or meta frame that we can always plug into.
Yeah, so type is the overarching structure which underlies everything.
Yeah. Do you agree with that? Or you're asking the question, but what do you say about that?
I agree with that. I have quite the controversial view of that.
Do you?
Yeah. Well, I think that a lot of the personality indicators that you see out there, they're behavioral, but in the sense that MBTI is able to, or at least the Jungian cognitive functions are able to encapsulate every single framework that's ever been made into a test. I think that is just talking about parts of that MBTI framework.
Exactly. Like literally same. I don't even really need to add on to this, but I see stuff like Strength Finders. I look at DISC. I look at some of the newer corporate stuff like the Hogan assessments or the PI, and I go, all they've done is take extroverted thinking and make it this. Like all they've done is take this archetype and break it up and call it this. Like in the second book that I'm writing, now that I've inspired myself, I talk about how Ray Dalio and Adam Grant did this new thing called Principles U, which is another Big Five addition to the Big Five, which you could see the correlation. And you and I have already talked about the correlation between Big Five and MBTI. It's like, how many times are we going to rebrand the archetypes until we just go, it's all Jung? Like it's just going to come back to Jung again. But everyone's got something to sell apparently. So, but like you said, MBTI can always be drawn back to any of the new assessments.
And not everyone will agree with that, but they're wrong. So
love it, Joyce. Love it.
And so in your book, you talk about its applications into the workplace. And so I'm wondering about your broad thoughts on that.
Yeah. Well, where I've actually done it, and And that's why I can speak to it confidently, because I'm not like, this would be interesting as an idea, but I'm like, I'll show you where it can be done. I really like it in job descriptions and interviewing. Those that are familiar with the Z method, where it's like you're taking into account all the different functions in your like project management or in a R&D discussion. In an interview, you could ask 8 questions and make sure that you're covering all the functions, and go, well, this person had a tremendously well thought out answer for NI, NE, but in terms of like their SI and SE, they were really weak or something like that. And the reason I say you can use that framework is that you're not allowed to just say, we know this, I want an ISTJ for this accounting role. But we know typically on broad scale, statistically, ISTJs or ESTJs might be better, or STJs might be better at this work. So we ask questions to figure out if that's their type. And that's also controversial because any type can do anything. But the way you use the functions is you will not miss something, essentially. You will, like the meta frame again, if you ask all the functions, there will be nothing missed in your interviewing. That's how I would say that as well. And then in job descriptions, I always like to include a section that's italicized that I call mindset, and I do bullet point mindset, which is essentially what is the internal dialogue of the person sitting in the seat. Candidates reading this should self-select out reading that. If this is a sales role and it's about meeting with multiple clients a day, doing cold calls, facing rejection over and over, most introverts, I would just say broadly speaking, introverts would say, not me. It's better for the company. They get better candidates, they get people that realistically should apply for the role, and it just has less time to fill for your position. So type is everywhere, and you just got to plug it into the right places. And since I'm a recruiter, that's my background, I try to apply it to a space that is desperately needing it.
Yeah. Also, extroverts who hate people can also avoid that role and self-select out as well.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's self-selecting out is part of it. Like I don't want all the types to apply. I want the types that think this is my dialogue when I sit at that desk. So I'm going to apply.
And that's good because it gives people a realistic job preview of what they're actually going to be doing so that they're not misplaced. They're not in something that is not a good person to job fit, because that's a serious issue. Sometimes people don't think about how they'll fit into the job when they get into it. So
I'll just take a job. It's like, you're going to hate it.
Well said. What are some of your favorite parts of the book that you wrote?
I think my favorite part of the book is a very short section, and I think it's in the chapter The Case for Type. And I reference random Keanu Reeves movie Constantine from 2005 with Rachel Weisz, and his character, John Constantine's having a conversation with the Rachel Weisz character, and he's explaining to her that God and the devil have this wager for the souls of mankind, and that she's atheist and she doesn't believe any of that stuff, and he believes that people are evil because they're nudged by the devil to do things, and she goes, people are evil. I don't believe in the devil. And Constantine says, well, you should. He believes in you. And then I was like, oh my God, that's type. Like, that's type in this way. It doesn't matter if you don't believe that personality exists, because you not believing it doesn't make it not true. And then I make this point that, do you think that you not caring about politics or you not being involved in politics means that politics doesn't care about you, or that doesn't try to influence you? And then do you think that not clicking on ads or not responding to things that people send you in the mail or any ads that pop up mean that marketing doesn't affect you? And I'm like, I kept thinking about, like, this is absolutely it. Like, the deniers of personality type does not mean they don't have a personality. So my okay, so what is, it is better to know your personality than to deny that you have one. That was my favorite part, because you'll also notice I don't care about validity and reliability. Like, I'm never trying to make an argument based on that.
And so it is productive for people to recognize that they have a personality, so that it's going to exist whether or not you admit to it. And so you might as well admit to it so that you can work with it rather than denying it's a thing. It's like if someone has ADHD their whole life and they are denying it, they're like, oh, I don't have it, but they have all the symptoms and they have to deal with all the repercussions of having it. And so isn't it just easier to learn about the fact that you have ADHD and figure out strategies to deal with that?
Yeah, and I'm still on the journey to figure out why that is. Like why, of course, people say the box, and that's the easiest go-to, like knee-jerk response, because they're told to say that. But they don't really know what that means. And I try to flip that on its head and say, like, well, it's a big box. It'll take you your whole life to navigate it. It's like, Jung always said you'll never fully integrate. So don't be upset that you're ENFP, because to discover the full extent of your type will take you forever. So let's not get worked up over this box because it's giant.
Yeah. I see it as every other box, like gender, sex, left hand, right hand. To label anything, to define anything is a box. So it's like, would you not call yourself female or male or non-binary? Non-binary is a box too, because it's still defining something. And so do you just want to not use anything in language because they're all defining and explaining something or describing something?
These are all brilliant.
It may not be the perfect definition, but that's because you have multiple factors at play. So type is a really good description of your nature, and your nurture might be different from the other person of your type, which may create these incongruencies, but it just means that there are more facets to learn about that impact type. It doesn't mean that type is false. It just means that type is the system that interacts with everything you've ever been through in your life. Mm-hmm. And that's something you describe in your book. You talk about the nurture aspects too that really affect how it manifests, your type manifests.
Yeah, and we're going to see a lot more information on that. So I know Dario Nardi's got one of his newer books that he's editing that's kind of taken a little bit from socionics with the dominant, creative,
normalizing, harmonizing.
That's right, from socionics. So he goes, well, this also helps you figure out the subtypes within the types, and then he's using the brain science there to also hammer that point home. So there's a spectrum of the types, and we're going to see that being more like brought to the forefront of the little bit of the nuance. I do think there are some models out there. One of the systems has like 512 different ways you can be or something like that. I forgot. I think that's OP has that. I think that misses the mark, but I think that the socionics as applied to MBTI with Dario's work is where we're going to go in terms of like subtypes and helping people figure out which niche they belong in.
So there are subtypes within types is the message. So Joe, something you talk about in your book too is the common questions around type, like, does your type change? Mm-hmm. And yeah, as typology people, we get asked that a lot.
Oh my God. I think that's only the second. I think that's the second. Either it's the first most common question I get or thing I see, or it's like, I used to be a J, but now I'm a P. And I go, no, but I'll explain why, and I'm not going to be a douche about it. I'm just going to be like, well, that's. I understand why you would think that, but here's why that's impossible. Like I would, if you said I went from an INTJ to ENTJ, I'd be like, you could, but J versus P is impossible. But can your type change? The first thing I talk about is Otto Krager wrote this great series of books back in the 80s called Type Talk. And he says type is the structure, the framework, the architecture of your personality or of your house. Think about it like that. You can change the color, rearrange the furniture, give it a whole facelift, reframe everything, have different people move in, even demolish it. But it's still got that same framework. So that's the nurture aspect as applied to the architecture of your personality. So when you take that and you go, oh, this is why like a very healthy ISFP will look way different than a extremely unhealthy with horrible childhood and all this trauma. They'll be the same structure, of the brain, but they will manifest it differently. And I think I talk about gene expression as well as like, the certain factors, food you eat, medicines you get will affect the way that your genes express themselves, though the DNA is still similar to someone else's DNA. I quote a lot of sources. I quote what Jung said. Jung probably had the best point way back in the day. He said, if we could change our personality so easily, we would just be able to decide to be a different personality. Because we would want to be the one that's the most charismatic, that makes the most money, gets the most of the opposite sex, and that would be it. We would just consciously decide that. Well, as brain research and as Dario said as well, he says that every type could be every type for a certain amount of time. So I could not be an ESFP for more than an hour before I'm burnt out. I don't think you could be an ESTP or something like that for more than a certain amount of time before you're just asleep. So I don't want to hear that you can change type as needed.
You can act as a certain type for a moment in time, just like anyone can pretend to be someone else. Fronting, as they call it. So you can put on an artificial exterior, but it's going to wear on you because when you're not authentic to your personality, it takes energy and you're going to get tired, like what you said, Joe. Mm-hmm. And so people oftentimes default to what comes most naturally to them. You can always learn to have opposite behavior, though. You could be like an ENTJ who naturally says things very direct and bluntly, but then you learn to be more subtle over time because people tell you that you have to be more soft because you're coming off as too confident. And yeah, people can modify their behaviors, but their natural tendency is to want to say it in a direct way. So that impulse to want to do it your natural way still exists. Maybe you have extroverts or any users who naturally think of so many ideas so quickly. They want to just say something really quick. Right. But they learned to hold back the impulse of just letting the NE out. But that doesn't mean that the NE is not there. You just learn to modulate it, to moderate it.
Yeah, modulate and moderate. I mean, pretty much you feel the compulsion to scream out your idea. And you recognize the awareness as it's bubbling up into your brain. I have to talk. I have business with the ENFP that does this a lot, and he recognizes that he does it, and gets him into some bad places because what happens is he says it, and they go, "Great idea, go ahead and you go ahead and do that." And he's like, "Well, I didn't mean me to do it. I just was saying it." So it's funny like that because you have to moderate it, and it could be anything. I think that's a good example of not running not holding yourself back, but I don't know what it would be called. I mean, I think moderate is the better word.
Yeah, it's adaptation. So just because you can adapt endlessly doesn't mean that your core is different. So you can add a lot of creative things in your house, as using the house analogy you talked about. But ultimately, the superstructure of the house is still house-like. And so just because you can superficially act like a certain type for a period of time, it just means that you change the color of the rooms in your house. Yep. And so type is not to say how much you can adapt. Human beings are adaptable, but they do say your starting point and what comes most naturally to you on autopilot if you just let it go, without any trauma, without anything else influencing it.
Yes, and on that point, another thing I write in the book is that it's actually relief to know that you can't be anything you want to be, in the sense that if you know what lanes you're really good at, then you can focus your talents 10x towards that. Instead of getting out into the world, you graduate college and they're like, you can be whatever you want to be. Oh, that's a stressful thing to hear because it's like, well, there's a lot of things out there. And then you bounce around. My idea of this, being a lawyer is not what I want to do. I want to be an architect, or I want to do something else. Type gives you that window to be like, it's okay. You don't have to be a doctor. You can be this. And actually that's proven that you want to be this through your type. So it's such a relief when you're like, oh, thank God, that's just not me. Not to say that flexing towards that direction might not be beneficial, but let's not make a career out of it. We might try that as a hobby.
It's very validating to know that, hey, you're not the only one struggling to appreciate maybe the job that you're at. Like
Yes.
people of your archetype have struggled with this job in the reoccurring past. So you don't have to feel alone, because it makes sense, the reason why you feel that way. You're not crazy.
Mm-hmm.
You're not crazy being an ENFP in accounting and not liking to do all the detailed taxes all the time. And so what type gives us permission to lean into is, if you're not fulfilled, if you're not happy, it allows you to see potential reasons why. So, oh, are you not using your dominant or preferred processes enough?
Mm-hmm.
And that's why you're feeling depressed. It gives you pinpoints for why you might be experiencing dysthymia, for instance. It's like, oh, that low grade depression you feel, maybe it's because you've been dishonest to your type preferences. And that's why you feel sad, because you've always been trying to be someone other than you. And type can be that final nail in the coffin to get you to admit to yourself harder truths about yourself.
And that's why people don't want to do type. They want to avoid, they don't want to know, because it's like, once you've peeked behind the curtain, you can't come back. And that's kind of like my first thing. I mentioned in the book, like, there's a great scene in Harold and Kumar where they're like super stoned and they're leaving their apartment and they walk 20 feet and they're like, Harold's like, hey, did you forget your wallet? And they turn around and they're like, no, we've gone too far. They're like 2 feet away. They're like 20 feet away from the door. And I'm like, that's the journey with type. Like, but I think that's where people stop, because if you do understand your type, you can no longer make excuses for the way you are. I mean, you could try to deny it, but like most people don't come back once they've taken that leap. They don't go like, yeah, I learned all the functions and I did the archetypes, but it wasn't for me. Like, no one in the history of type has ever said that. What they do is they avoid starting so they don't have to face it. And that's just, that's the hardest part, is getting people to start the journey. But everyone, and I try to hammer this point home, is every type gets an ROI. It's hard to say what exactly everyone gets. I have an ENFP example, an ENTJ, 2 ENTJs, and an ENTP example of what they each got, and I have quotes from them, and it's all different. But I think like how you know type is successful in your life is when you start to talk in it. Now you adapt, because it's a language, and you know that, like, it's a whole nomenclature. Once you start to talk in it, like you say, oh, I'm using my TI right now, that's when like it's fully integrated into you. Like, I don't think you or I will ever not talk in type.
Yeah, it's a language. Once you learn, you can't go back. The reason why is because there's a lot of truth to it. Once you see it in everywhere. You see it in the overlying, as we were talking about, superstructure of the world. And it's like when you learn about the law of gravity, you never go back. You never try to jump off the top of a building anymore, because you know that it exists. You can't deny it as a reality.
No, you can't. And that's there's so many good analogies that you can tie back into it. Again, proving that it's all pervasive.
The all pervasiveness is why you can't forget about it, because it's in everything you do, say, think, or the world.
Do you think that type is a generational thing, in the sense that the boomer generation, our parents, are less interested in it, but like millennials are more interested in it, like in self-discovery? Can you generalize it by generation?
That's a good question. I think that people who are millennials or in the younger generation are more into type because of the internet. It just makes information more widely accessible. And it's the pop quizzes. I think just young people like to take quick quizzes that tell them about themselves, because it's like, well, I'd love to learn more about me. It's a little bit of an ego boost. So that's people's entry into type. And also, type is a relatively new phenomenon. Carl Jung came up with it in the 1940s, and Isabel Biggs Myers, when it started to become actually popular, was in the 1980s. So it's only been out in a popular way for like 40 years.
Yeah.
Which is why younger people know about it, because it's only been made into consciousness for this short period of time.
Right.
So.
Okay, yeah, that's a good point. And I mean, Jung took some of his stuff from even older, I forget what it's called. I need to look into it. It's the like melancholic, sanguine, caloric. What is that called? The temperaments?
The 4 temperaments. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was back then. I haven't studied that enough, but like we've always tried to categorize different people in a certain way. Like, this is not new. I just think we Jung discovered the best one. Now, I have a question for you, and this is going to be in my second book, which I still have to figure out what the title of that, but it'll come to me in a dream probably. Is, do you think we should be trying? No, let me ask it differently. Do we need to be creating more models for type?
My answer to that would be yes, just because I think the diversity of thought is good. Sometimes someone has a better definition of extroverted feeling than another person. We should be given the chance to have people create models so that people can decide for themselves which of the function definitions or what type of model is the best model. Now, I think that there should be, as we were talking about, a meta model. So there can be many little tiny models trying to articulate the nuances of the meta model, but there should be a singular meta model overarching everything. And so in terms of having many models, that can also be bad because it's just people describing the same truth in different
Sorry.
No worries.
Have a drinking problem.
Okay.
God damn it.
SE inferior's gotta just go wild. Your inner ESFP is showing.
That monarch type. All right, hold on, let me just make sure I'm got it all out.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Go ahead. Sorry, you're on a really good roll there, and I had to fuck it up.
No worries. It's kind of comedic.
All right. Go ahead.
In regards to many little models being made, should more models be created? I would say it makes things more confusing needlessly.
Mm-hmm.
So people tend to make up different names for describing the same phenomenon, and it's at a certain point it becomes redundant. For instance, the four temperaments, there are slight mashups of that. So let's say, for instance, disc is another way of putting the four temperaments.
The colors.
The colors is the same thing as the disc. And so sometimes corporations, when they can make money, what they'll do is they'll just create separate fragmented models that are essentially the same thing because they don't care about the theory, they just care about the profit. And that dilutes any sort of good thought.
Preach. Yep.
Yeah.
That's my like biggest annoyance is I'm like, I know that, you know, Jordan Peterson, Adam Grant, they know about type. They actively talk against type, but then they're like, but also by my Big Five personality, they've also recreated Big Five in their own way, like with, you know, whatever science there. I'm like, that's why I think the beauty of Jung was that he didn't care about profit. And I don't know if that's an NI thing, or it seems to be a lot of NI creators, inventors, philosophers never considered the application of like, well, I make money. What's the business application here? Like, what's the ROI, or like, how are we going to apply this? Which made it beautiful, which made it right. Like, it was inherently the good thing to do when you're dealing with personality and psyche and stuff like that, and the self. When you go, what's the best, how can we rebrand this so that corporations can easily package it up and have a 4-day workshop and I can add zeros to the invoice? That's how you know it's not going to actually help anybody, in my mind.
It dilutes the helpfulness because the focus is on the wrong part. So I think the reason why I enjoy the online community and their love of the cognitive functions is because they do it because they love the theory and they don't do it for a different ulterior motive. Mm-hmm. And so when you have people who are genuinely passionate about something and doing it for the right reasons, they create amazing things together. Which is why I'm always happy to collaborate with YouTubers like you, Joe.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Because your heart is in the right place when it comes to type. And so you create good stuff out of that.
And I'm not going to lie and say that, you know, I want to turn my passion into a career. And obviously you have typing sessions as well. And like I said, I guarantee, I know that you have a course, or I think you have a course or something, but heart's still in the right place. Like, this is to help people. This is not a like get rich quick scheme, or this is not like what's the most popular thing now. Let's just get on the trend. We're not. I think type is a niche. It's never going to be like it's never going to be so mainstream, and you have a bunch of people trying to, a bunch of scammers trying to get in here. But that's why I have the book priced like everyone should be able to afford it. Like it's not like one of these like $40 hardbacks. It's like, oh my God, dude, like come on. Which I've never had anyone say like, I can't afford that ebook. It's like $10 in this economy. Like no one's ever saying that. So, but I don't know where I was going with that, but I think there are some, and I will not say who they are, but I think there are some that have tried to figure out within this community, how can I make money? And that's unethical.
If it's the primary aim, totally, yeah. And you know what's very 5-wing-6 about you? Is that you like to collect what people think during this interview we have together. You're like, all right, Joyce, what are your thoughts on this topic? And I'm like, oh, yeah, that adds on well to our chat with Azura Psych previously about it, because that's a part of your 6-wing there.
Okay. Yeah.
Because 6s are known for consulting. So what they do is they just like to know what other people think about something, even if they don't go along with it. They're just like, okay, what do you think about this?
That's okay. Well, thank you for saying that. I think that's part of the reason why I try to bring in all the voices that have said certain things, and that's why part of my second book is going to be asking people like yourself to contribute your thoughts to the book. I'm including a section called "From the Community" that I'm getting, like I'm collecting the collective conscious of the type community now, and saying like it's not just Joe. Like, what does everyone else say? What are your thoughts? Because back in the day, in a totally different life, what I would do is I would post questions on Reddit, and then I would take those responses, get like the hive mind of people smarter than me, and then just write about that or do a YouTube video on that. And I felt like that was the ultimate way to go about an idea.
Yeah, which has a lot of 6 flavoring to it, because the 6s are known for triangulating thoughts. So they have their own thoughts, but they triangulate between sources.
Okay, because I think my wife I'm pretty sure she's a 6-wing 5 as an ISTJ. Does that fit?
Yeah, ISTJs are commonly 6-1-9.
6-1-9. Okay. Definitely 1 is probably in her tri-type, but yeah, I'm just like that over the overlap of type and Enneagram is just so perfect that I'm like, who is denying this? Like, what kind of crazy person is denying that this stuff is real?
Yeah, you're preaching to the choir, so.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I'm excited to contribute to your second book, Joe. And thanks for talking about your manifesto. It is brilliant. It has a lot of great insights into it. And Joe is signing copies that he is sending to people too. So you get.
And I write a real message in there. I don't just like sign my name. Like I'm like, even if I don't know who you are, I'll be like, I will write something that I have not written for the previous person before. It won't be like, thank you so much. Thanks for being a fan, Joe. It's like, because honestly, I am charging $10 more. I gotta put $10 more worth of like thought into it. So I can't just sign it and like, so I'll leave you with that. I will like write you something actually unique and not just sign my name and charge you more.
Yeah. And on that note, feel free to check out his book. It is really wonderful. And if you want to know more about Joe as a person and his discovery into type, or functions in a more condensed way where you can actually read it and understand it and not be left confused. And if you are looking for a way to think about it in terms of the workplace, Joe is your man. And so thanks for coming on. I'll see you all in the next episode. Take care.